Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This is another one of the requests off the list. I have sort of covered this in the past, but I do it as a separate subject. And the question really is, what is my selection criteria for choosing whether or not to mount an orchid? There isn't much selection criteria. Probably, with the exception of the Deesers, every orchid in here could be mounted because they're epiphytes. They will grow on a mount. The main differentiation for me is what the roots need to be doing. Now, if you take things like the Miltoniopsis, Masdevallias, Restrepias, the Draculas, they shouldn't dry out. They come into that silly category of evenly moist. I like to refer to that as constantly moist. But when I water those, I let them get almost dry before I water them again. Now in the winter that could take 10 days. In the summer, more like 5 or 6. So my frequency would be adjusted according to seasons and how fast things are growing. But I wouldn't mount those simply because to achieve what their roots need, I'd have trouble keeping up with them on a mount. And quite honestly, they grow okay in a pot, but they could be mounted. I don't think Paphiopedilums do that well on a mount, but they could. I don't really see why not. I mean, some of them are actually, they do grow on the ground, but they're not really true terrestrials. They grow in the leaf litter on the forest floor. And others grow on sort of rocky outcrops and, you know, various things like that. They would probably be the least thing I would think about mounting. It's traditional to put them in a pot, basically. We come on to Cattleyas. I've got some Cattleyas mounted. I mean, there's one here in bloom, and these grow well on a mount. Yeah. The reason that one's on a mount, when I got it, this came out of the big box from Beatrix. I didn't know what size it was going to grow to, and when I looked at what I got, I thought that's probably a seedling, or it's been certainly grown from a seedling. And it looked like it was going to stay like quite a compact plant, and it was a good guess because it did. Yeah, it's still growing roots now. It's got another new growth started despite still being in bloom. That blows my theory of new growths being triggered by the blooms finishing. Well, some plants can be doing everything all at once. This is probably my most miniature Cattleya type. This used to be Sophronites. It's now classed as Cattleya. Tiny little pseudobulbs, a nice flat creeping habit, difficult to grow in a pot, quite honestly. You will see this recommended does well on a mount, you know, and yes it does. It spreads across the mount and stays flat. That makes life a bit difficult in a pot because it'll keep growing over the edge. Yeah. I've also got some larger Cattleyas on a mount. Where's my biggie? Oh, it's hiding. It's round the back here. No, I'm not going to be able to get that down without knocking stuff over. There's a Cattleya around the back of that rack, but to get at it, I would normally water these first so that they're out the way, and then I can reach in underneath and sort of unhook it. I'm not doing that now. I'll end up knocking stuff over. Yeah, so Cattleyas do well on mounts. They can do well on mounts. They also do well in pots as long as they've got loads of air around the roots. The criteria with the Cattleya types is they need a wet-dry cycle, and they would prefer it to be quite fast. So they lend themselves to going on a mount quite well, you know. Oncidium types. Decision to mount an Oncidium type is really based on size. I mean, if you look at this Sotoanum here, the mount would be huge to accommodate that plant. and it's so vigorous it would expand its size at such a rate it would be off the mount quite quickly, even though it might have started on a rather large one. And large mounts can get just clumsy to handle. You know, I mean, this mount here is large, it's clumsy, it weighs a lot. It didn't need to be quite that big actually, but it's a large plant, you know, and its roots have expanded over most of it, but the plant was stuck in the middle of the mount and the roots have extended in most directions. But that's a large plant. You know, the canes are nearly 2 foot long on that. I'm not going to be able to put that back now, am I? I'm going to have to do it later. Although it came out of the gap, it won't go back in there without moving a couple. So when we get on to Oncidium types, a lot of that is just purely based on size. I mean, my tiny twinkle up here, it not only grows well on a mount, it actually looks good. Yeah? It grows naturally. All the new growths are coming out in all directions. It's gradually getting wider. This little piece at the bottom I'm over the moon with. It's a separate piece actually. If you look round the back, there's a couple of tiny little leafless bulbs, and then it had one bulb with leaves on. And it's pushed out 2 new growths, one growing up into the middle and one growing out to the right. Brilliant. That means that section of the mount will soon be full of new growths. Loads of new growths up round the top. That works great on a mount. But notice it's got a hell of a lot of moss. And that's its second lot of moss. The first lot of moss is underneath, buried. And it was getting so thin and wispy that it just would not stay hydrated. So I put a second lot of moss over the top. So most of the moss that you see there is new moss. And all the new roots have now got something to grow into. That works great on a mount. But there is a size limitation. Out of my Oncidium types that are mounted, this is the biggest one. And it's not exactly a huge plant, but it will be soon. You know, if you look up the top there, there's 3 new growths next to each other. Well, what are they going to do next time round? They're going to produce 1 or 2 more new growths on top of those. That's going to take it up to the top of the mount. Coming out sideways, coming up through the middle, heading out in this direction. It's expanding across. So if it was in a pot, it would now be heading to the edge of the pot. As it is, on a mount, it's still got a bit of room. Okay. And that's another one that had a second layer of moss put on top, because the first layer had, you know, over time it just flattens out and, you know, looks a bit stale. So in the Oncidium category, I would say size is a limiting factor, but it isn't really. It's just up to you how big a mount you actually want to go to accommodate the growth rate of the plant. Now, some Oncidiums, their lead will produce 1 new bulb, and that's all they'll ever do. And some Oncidiums have only got 1 lead. Yeah? Well, if they only produce 1 new bulb at the front of that lead, it heads off in one direction and one direction only. Well, on a mount, it's going to be off the edge, isn't it? Or it's going to come away from the mount and grow towards you, in which case you get aerial roots. And they are often difficult to hydrate. Oncidium types, when they're actively growing, they don't want to dry out. You know, they need the moisture all the time. So you're going to be watering perhaps twice a day. And therein comes the next limitation. You. How often are you prepared to be there to water your orchids? If you like mounts and you head down that pathway, you need to be around. You know, somebody who goes away on Monday and comes back on Friday, your mounts will probably be dead by the time you get back, because they'll have dried off the next day. They'll be dry on Tuesday, you know. And I mean, I've got good humidity in here, and I've got plants in here that are dry in 2 hours after being watered. They need that wet-dry cycle, otherwise they wouldn't be very healthy. They'd be suffering. Then we get on to the amount of moss. Let's take a little Orangus. Spot the moss. It hasn't got any. The notes on this little one say mainly found on bare tree trunks. It likes to grow on bark, not in amongst moss and roots of other plants and stuff like that. It likes to grow that way. It would be nice if it grew that way and bloomed. That particular one has never bloomed. But it's still, looking on the internet, it's still a young plant. Well, even though it's growing, it grows plantlets, it forms a clump. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 clumps on the go there. But looking at blooming size plants that I've seen on the internet, the leaves are about 3 or 4 inches long. And mine aren't. The largest leaf on there is about 2 inches long. So this one hasn't reached blooming size yet. But it likes to grow on bark. Some of the Orangus will only be found on a couple of types of trees on bare bark with nothing else. That's the only place they've ever been found. They've never been found growing like some other of the epiphytes in amongst other plants, bromeliads, ferns, types of mosses and things like that to get their roots into. There's quite a few of the Orangus just don't grow that like that. They like a bare branch or a bare trunk, and that's how they like to be. So when you're looking at the type of plant, like an Oncidium type, if it likes to drink when it's actively growing, then there's no point in mounting it like that, is there? That's dry in an hour when I water that. If I threw it in a bucket and absolutely drowned it, it would still be dry in an hour, because there's nothing there to hold the water. That's how that one likes it. Would an Oncidium put up with that? Would it hell? So, when I mount an Oncidium type that, you know, when in active growth, likes to drink, yeah, it's got to have a lot of moss. It's got to be heavy on the moss. That's my expression, I know. But heavy on the moss means a good wodge, a good thick layer of moss. And that way, it'll stay moist longer. Now, I should be able to have a classic example. I watered my mounts yesterday. Where's one that's quite heavy on the moss without knocking everything down? See, when I water my mounts, I take them down in a sequence. That moss is still damp. That was watered yesterday mid-morning. It's still damp. Why? Because we happened to have a cloudy day yesterday. I didn't get the heat in here, which is a really good test for my new shade netting, isn't it? Because it hasn't been put to the test yet. The day I put it up, the sun disappeared. And it's gone today. We had a lot of rain overnight. We've had quite a lot of rain today. I wouldn't call it heavy rain, but it's been raining on and off most of today. What's the time now? It's getting on a bit. 4 o'clock. Ooh, nearly tea time. Nearly time to pour the wine out, but not yet. Yeah, so the amount of moss you choose depends on the type of plant you're mounting. And like my Tolumnias, let's see, where's one I can get at? Ugh. Oh, there's one. I can grab that one reasonably easy without knocking anything down, I think. Right, Tolumnias. They like a daily wet-dry cycle. So if you're growing Tolumnias and they're staying wet for 3 days, eventually your roots are going to suffer. They don't like it. They like their water in the morning and they like to be dry by the end of that day. Not the next day or the day after, that day. That's how they like to grow. So this one had some moss when it was originally mounted. Where are most of the roots now? Yeah, most of them have headed off onto the bare mount. Some are in the moss because they have to get through the moss to get out the other side. But I wouldn't put loads and loads of moss on a mount for a Tolumnia because like that Oncidium I just got down, that's still quite damp from yesterday. This one isn't. It's bone dry. And it's bone dry and it's not going to get watered today because it's a dull cloudy day and I've got no temperature in here. I'm currently at 21 degrees, not 30 like we've been having lately. So, you know, part of the choice is what the plant needs as regards watering and whether it likes a wet dry cycle that's fast, in which case easy on the moss. Yeah, you put too much moss on there, you could be keeping it wet too long, especially when your temperatures are lower, like on dull days like today. And in the winter time, you know, I go down to 12 degrees in the winter time in here. My Tolumnias with hardly any moss and my little Orangus with no moss in some cases, they'll get watered about every third day. They'll be allowed to be bone dry because in those temperatures they won't be up to much. What else have we got? Obviously a hell of a lot of my Dendrobiums are mounted. There is a limit there, again, on size. Oh, while we're talking about size, this giant Brassia that I bought at Burnham's, that could be mounted, but what a hell of a mount that would have to be. They grow well mounted. That's just too big. If I split it, I could pick a little piece like that, say a couple of bulbs with a new growth, and mount that, but eventually it would outgrow the mount. And look at the size of the pseudo bulbs. Think of the weight, yeah, as it expands and grows to this sort of size plant. Imagine how heavy that mount would be. Can you support it? Yeah. There's another theory. Weight. Yeah. You get something like this. This is Dinema polybulbon. It's a rambler. Yeah. If you have a look at how that's growing, it's desperately trying to stay flat on the mount, and it's not succeeding. It's heading outwards. All of those new pieces sticking out could be broken off and remounted on a new mount. Yeah? And if those sections were broken, cut off, it would shoot out from behind those points and start the plant again from the middle. I've already done it once. If I did it now, it would be the second time. But what I'm hoping is come towards the end of the year, when postage is not a problem because it's too hot and hasn't become a problem because it's too cold, that little bit in between that we call autumn, there'll be some plants to go. And I'm hoping that people will be interested in growing this. It can grow in a pot, but it's not as happy as it is on a mount. Aerial roots, well, you've got to be prepared to keep your humidity up. Otherwise they'll just shrivel and die back. And then that section of the plant is not happy anymore. Yeah. So in this case I've got the humidity. Yeah. And in addition to that, look at the bit that's attached the best. Is there any moss up there? No. That actually loves that bare bit there. That's the fastest growing extension on the plant. By far. And it's branching out, if you look. There's new growths coming out the side of that extension. It's becoming a bit of a nuisance at the top there because it keeps getting tangled up with a hook when I try and hang it up. Right, back to Dendrobiums. The main decision on Dendrobiums is, do they naturally grow up or do they naturally grow down? Now I've got another request that's not going to be easy to do, is how do you identify the different types of Dendrobiums? Well, Dendrobiums, unlike any other genus, are divided into sections. This bit always makes me laugh. One of those sections is called Dendrobium, so they're Dendrobiums. Sometimes it gets silly, but you've got Latoria types, you've got the Phalaenanthes, you've got the Callistas, there's various sections. There's about 6 where a lot live, and then dozens and dozens and dozens of other sections, some of which have got one orchid in them, and they're obscure. Those ones that you can't even pronounce. And some of those you just would not find in cultivation. They would be of, I think the expression is, botanical interest. And us orchid collectors are not normally keen on a bloom that you've got to get a magnifying glass out to see, or whatever. But anyway, so with the dendrobiums, it's a matter of which way up would they prefer to grow. Now, one of the sections has got things like a nosmum in it. When you get canes this big, if you want to try and keep those upright, well, have a go. But they don't naturally grow like that. They hang on to the sides of branches, not the top. They tend to grow on the sides of the branches or on the trunks or in a fork, where the canes can grow outwards. If you take this one is pushing I'm picking this one because it's smaller. This is either a phyllum or, no, it's primulinum, very similar. I don't even think it's called primulinum anymore. But this throws its new growths looking as though they're going to grow upwards. If you look at those two there, they are curling upwards, yeah? They will get a reasonable size, at which point the weight will start to pull them out, and they'll end up being horizontal. And then eventually they will get heavy enough to point downwards. They are naturally pendulous. And there's a whole section of these typified by a nosmum, basically, but in amongst there are lots of others, and they naturally hang down. If you look, if I try and stand that upright, those canes don't want to know, do they? They're flopping. So if you try and grow them upright, they will flop over, and you'll end up having to stake them if you want to keep them that way. And then they don't look so nice because they don't look so natural. If they want to hang down, let them. And there's a whole set of these, and I've got quite a few of them. And why do I like them? Because they can go right up in the roof, which means in the winter they get the strongest light I can give them, because they're right up in the roof. Now, a dendrobium that grows upright can't go up in the roof because it will touch the roof. Yeah? So that section up there is mainly for those that decide they like to hang downwards. And if you have a look there, it's pretty obvious these like to hang down, don't they? Yeah? Even my Hercoglossum, the new growths up here are heading towards the roof. They'll not make it. They will keel over before they get there, and then they'll come down here with the rest of them. Yeah, there's another one. Yeah, this can grow either way, this one. Yeah, that can grow upright or pendulous. There are some that you can choose. You've also got in the dendrobiums miniatures. They're never going to grow big. This one, I'll show it soon because I think the bloom's going to go, Mr. Hairy. Now, when you're trying to identify which section the dendrobium comes in, you'd have fun with this one, because there's one section that's nicknamed the black hair type. Do those look like black hairs? Do they hell? And yet that's the section it's in. Yeah? So there'll always be some confusion. This one is not easy to grow. This is Dendrobium Cinelli, however you want to grow it. Mine doesn't seem to be doing bad, and it's just recently decided to have a burst of root growth. It tends to go with the newer growths it's pushing out, which are coming out in all directions here. I think I've got a single bloom this year. That's all I'm going to get. It's not going to do anything else this year, and that is on one of the oldest canes. These two nice large canes here that have both got a couple of leaves going over now, by the time we get out into next year, those will probably be leafless. Those are highly likely to bloom next year, and maybe some of the other smaller canes. This is not easy to grow, and a lot of the reason it's not easy to grow is the roots rot quite readily, and they seem to do it for no reason. You look after it the same, day in, day out, everything's fine, it's growing well, and then it'll just go. And I've had one do that. This one seems to be hanging in there, but a lot of it is geared up to in those sections. I was just going to go back to this. I'll go back to that, even though I was on about discussing mounts. The sections that the dendrobiums are in. There are two sections. I will go over these properly, but you got pendulous dendrobiums that need a dry winter rest with bright light and they need to cool down, there's two sections. Yeah, one of them, the cooling down is quite severe, and you're looking at, you know, around 7-8 degrees centigrade. I'm not doing the F stuff. You have to get into the modern world, you lot. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. But there's another lot, like a drier winter rest, and that would probably be cold enough to damage them. They like to go down to about sort of 12, 13, 14 degrees, which is quite cool, but not cold. Don't get those muddled up. As I said, I'll go over these sections because there's some strange things come out of looking into them. Yes, so back to mounts. You can decide to mount any epiphyte. It's whether you're prepared to put in the effort to water them in a manner they would appreciate, to the manner they're accustomed. Nobile hybrids, we've got one there, one in there, and one up in the corner. They quite like being upright. They will grow pendulous, but you'll find the new growths will try and grow upwards. God, the size of that mealybug on there. So I spotted that from miles away. It's an ex-mealybug, or it is now anyway. So they quite like to grow upright. The Phalaenopsis type. Oh, and Martin, I double checked. I went back to the video where I split my Phalaenopsis type Dendrobium Types into two. The other one ended up as a single cane, and it had at the time a tiny new growth, which is now going mad and doing roots like it's going out of fashion. So that was one piece, and that was the other piece. This is easily identified on the video by having two fully leaved canes, yeah, and one short leafless cane and no new growths, which it still hasn't got. That is Phalaenopsis Types, and it is nothing like the previous blooms. The only thing I can say is that it's a different time of year, it's blooming at different temperatures. It's blooming at different light levels. Maybe that's had an effect. Also, this time of year, it's probably getting a bit more feed and water than it would have got last time it bloomed. Now, these are funny. The Phalaenopsis type, they don't like to get cold. And if kept in the right conditions, they'll push out new growths anytime and will bloom anytime. Well, I can't do that here. Yeah, because I've got to chill down in the winter or my resting type dendrobiums won't bloom. So these have to put up with it. Yeah, the nobiles love that chill down. Yeah, but what about this one? This blooms in the middle of summer. It's going over now, yes, but it has been looking good. It's got some real manky leaves on it. These are about to fall off, so I'm not particularly worried about them. The new growths are pushing on, including this one heading up into the mount above it. It's getting so tall. But the nobile types like to cool down. You can mount them if you like. Oh, I've got some of the... This was a nobile type that somebody gave me. This came as a gift. I can't remember its name, so don't ask. That's a nobile type, but it's not a giant. I don't think it's going to grow huge. But it's growing nicely since I got it. The new growths have pushed on nicely, and it's done its thing with the root system. It wasn't a brilliant root system when I got it, it is now. So that's a nobile, and at the moment it's heading upwards, but it's on a mount. Yeah, that's a little bit heavy on the moss for a nobile, but what's going to happen to that in the winter? That's going to cool down. It's going to need a bit of a rest, and it doesn't really want much water. In the winter, that's a bit heavy on the moss. This time of year when it's actively growing, it might not even be enough. So you've got to get some sort of balance in there, and a lot of the mounting decisions are based on seasons. You have to stop and think, how am I going to look after this in the winter? Does it need special needs? And I've got a lot in here that are special needs in the winter. because they need to stay dry for quite long periods. So I can't go too heavy on the moss. Moss in the winter at 12 degrees will stay wet for a week. Yeah, especially when the humidity's up. Yeah, I don't keep my humidity anywhere near as high as the winter when the temperatures go down. I try and make an effort to actually reduce the humidity in the winter time. Anyway, so your decisions on to mount or not are based on many things. But if you're going to mount orchids, those that like to drink when they're in active growth, you need to get a bit heavy on the moss to be able to keep them hydrated, sometimes into the second day. But certainly in the warmer weather in here, I can't go 3 days. I can go 2. I didn't, you know, as I said, I watered yesterday. I haven't watered the mounts today. They'll be fine. It's raining again now. And I think the rain moves on into tomorrow as well. But I'm out all day Sunday with the garden party, so I can't leave them another day. They will have to be watered tomorrow, probably. Maybe. I might leave it till Sunday morning, I don't know. I have these moments. But yeah, that's the things you've got to think about. Size, whether the plant prefers to grow upright. Oncidium types will grow upright. They're not going to hang upside down. If you plant them upside down, the new growths will grow in the opposite direction. They will point upwards. Some dendrobiums love to be upside down. Some of them you can make grow upside down. Hibiki is a bit of an anomaly, because although I planted it upside down, and what I planted is that bit, that would look perfectly good upright, wouldn't it? Quite a happy plant, sticking up like that. I decided to do it that way. Most of the new growths are heading upwards. They're curling upwards, those that have survived. Oh, I've got some new ones coming. Oh, goody. Yeah, so I've lost a few new growths on this thing recently, but that's quite heavy on the moss. Why I did that, I really don't know, but it doesn't really need as much as that, quite honestly. Now in the summer that's fine, because it will dry out. Come the winter time, that's going to stay wet quite a long time, and it won't be growing much in the winter, I don't expect, so I'll have to watch that one. But yeah, that's your decisions really, is does the plant naturally grow upright? Does it naturally grow flat? Yeah, something like, if I can get this down, there's no sense in deciding whether this one grows upright or pendulous, because it grows flat. It grows out sideways. So it makes no difference which way up you put this, it's going to grow out sideways anyway. That's my Dendrobium jenkinsii. It's pushed on quite a few new growths, sort of taken, having been totally ripped apart and planted again. There's quite a lot of new root growth going on, tucked in underneath all there. You see in some places it's visible, but seems to have taken off. I don't think I'll get a mass blooming this spring, not like this coming spring I mean. But as I said, that one grows flat, so there isn't really much of a decision. Its bigger cousin, the Lindleyi, similar, but this has a tendency to try and stay upright. Yeah? Oh, I've got another nice new growth coming out there, I hadn't spotted that. This had several new growths when I got it. This is quite a young plant, one of which aborted, which really annoyed me. It's that one tucked up in there, because that stopped that direction of growth, because it was the only one. But it did push out a couple of nice ones this side, the ones with the larger leaves there, and it's now starting a new one. So whether that one blooms or not, I don't know. Looking at the tiny little canes on this one, it looks like it's been grown on from a seedling, in which case it will take longer to get to blooming size than if it had been a division. Anyway, so yeah, decision to hang upside down or put up, you know, bolt upright, you'll have to make your own really. It is quite plant dependent, but certainly Cattleyas and Oncidium types are going to try and grow upright no matter what you do with them. They will try and push skywards, that's their natural sort of way. Others like to grow flat, So on a mount they will grow in all directions. There is no top or bottom. They just grow out in all directions, and they will grow downwards quite happily. And then there are those, certainly in amongst the dendrobiums, that just need to hang down. The sheer size of the canes cannot be supported on a mount growing upwards. You just can't do it. Yeah. So that's a chat about some mounting decisions and thoughts that go into it. But don't forget the workload. Yeah. If you're going to mount orchids, you need to be around to water when it's warm, when you've got temperatures up, you know, heading towards the 30s, getting up in the high 20s. Mounts are going to dry daily, and some plants don't like to be dry for any length of time at all. So you've got to be there. You've got to be prepared to do that. Yeah. And if not, stick them in a pot. Yeah. They'll go either way. As I said, there are some plants like this one. It's not going to be happy in a pot, is it? If it grows on bare bark and that's the only place it's found, it's not going to be happy in a pot. It would have to be growing on something really large with loads of air. It would probably grow on lava rock in a pot or something like that, but it probably wouldn't be happy in bark, because even the largest bark pieces probably wouldn't be big enough. There wouldn't be enough air around the roots. So there we go. To mount or not to mount. A few thoughts of mine, but it does vary. Growing in the home with the lower humidity levels, mounts are not going to be that easy. Yeah, you need to get that humidity up. You know, even with Tulumnias, like, they need a daily wet-dry cycle. They still don't like dry air, you know. So yeah, think about your environment before you start mounting everything that moves. Somebody's just sprung to mind there. If it moves, you'll mount it. Keep on the move, Gingerpuss. Anyway, see you next time. That's another one off the list, and I will come back to the dendrobium sections and how their section affects care. And that is a generalisation when I get there, because in amongst a section there are dendrobiums that need different care. So just the section it's in does not necessarily dictate its care, but it's a flipping good guideline. Oh, that rain's getting heavy. Yay, water in my garden. So see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.